morning, good afternoon, good evening or night, wherever you are joining us from around the world. And welcome to this ESG Exchange's second ESG Tech Talk with Sue Lloyd from ISSB, Tjeerd Krumpelman from ABN AMRO, and Rod Carr, Chair of the New Zealand Climate Commission, kindly sponsored by Archer IRM. Before I get into the detail of today's topic, I'd like to maybe just give you some background as to the ESG Exchange. And in doing so, Carolyn, perhaps you might just share your screen rather, and just bring up our website, the About Us page. So in the first instance, the problem that we're here to address in the ESG Exchange is that there simply aren't enough experts in the world to help companies move this transition needle from the fossil fuel economy to the green economy. And that being the problem, we're very clear as to our purpose, our vision, and our impact. And our purpose is to bring scarce expertise to the world through a digitalized platform approach in collaboration with our global partners, which leads us to our first mission statement. And the first mission statement is to convene the global reporting ecosystem. And you'll see in the circles of influence, the circle there on the left, the blue, describes the logic that describes where the organizations reside in the right-hand circle, with clearly the standard setters in the very center and so forth. Having done that extraordinarily successfully, that leads us then to the second mission, which is to convene the global expertise. We have well over 100 experts just now. We will probably cut it off at about 300, organized across practice groups, experts coming from those organizations in the circles of influence that you saw a moment ago. But we're also looking for corporate experts, and a corporate expert is that beleaguered soul who today is faced with the challenges of corporate reporting, be it to proposed SEC when it comes out, the CSRD, of course, and here in this context, ISSB. So people who are confronted with the challenges of reporting, we want to really get them into the community such that they, as the voice of the customer, can tell us whether or not what we're producing in the form of these how-to playbooks that we are required to produce in collaboration with our partners, that they make sense, they can be operationalized for them. With that, I would now like to formally commence our webinar with introductions. In the first instance, I'd like to introduce you all to Sue Lloyd. Sue is the Vice Chair of the International Sustainability Standards Board, ISSB, and her appointment was announced in January 2022. She served as a member of the International Accounting Standards Board, ISSB, from 2014, and as the ISSB's Vice Chair from 2016. She also served as the Chair of the IFRS Interpretations Committee from 2017. In addition to her ISSB responsibilities, Sue played a leading role in the establishment of ISSB from 2020, including as a member of the Technical Readiness Working Group, which was created by the trustees to give ISSB a running start. Sue has led various positions in investment banking, both in the UK and Australia, and has served as a member of the Australian Accounting Standards Board. She has a master's degree in accounting and finance from the University of Auckland in New Zealand. Tjeerd Krumpelman is head of reporting, regulations, and stakeholder management at ABN AMRO, and chair of the global board for PCAF. He is also chair of the Integrated Thinking and Strategy Group at the IFRS Foundation. With more than 20 years experience in the banking sector, the last 10 years, he has been working with ABN AMRO's Corporate Sustainability Department. Within ABN AMRO, he heads up a team that offers advice on sustainability and is responsible for integrating thinking, non-financial and impact reporting. And finally, then we have Rod Carr. Dr. Rod Carr is currently the founding chair of New Zealand's Climate Change Commission, a position he held since 2019. He took up the position after retiring after a decade as Vice Chancellor of the University of Canterbury. Over a 20-year period, Rod served as Deputy Governor, Acting Governor and Non-Executive Director and Chairman of the Board of the Federal Reserve of New Zealand. He currently serves as an independent director of one of the largest commercial banks in New Zealand. For myself, I'm Global Director, Risk and Sustainability in Archer IRM. Outside of Archer, I'm Chair of the ESG Exchange's Technical Committee, which runs these ESG Tech Talks every second Thursday of every month. I'm also Commissioner of the Capitals Coalition Value Commission, where we're developing an open access database, which will in 2 or 3 years help organizations to put dollar values on their impacts. So kicking off today's webinar. Our today's session, as all sessions, focusing on what matters most, what are the challenges, and what are the insights that our panelists can share with you all. So I'm going to ask questions of Sue, Tjeerd, and Rod. And in the first instance, Sue, for you, in the context of material information for investor decision-making, which is the title of this webinar, what makes something material, can I ask you, for investors, Sue?
Thank you very much. So a fundamental anchor question for the International Sustainability Standards Board, because this frames the whole focus of our new standards that we just published. So in our standards, we are asking for information that enables investors to understand how sustainability risks and opportunities are going to really affect the value of a company in the future. So as an investor making your capital allocation decisions, what do I need to know about this company to really make me understand whether or not its value is going to be sustainable in the long term? And so we ask for information about sustainability related risks and opportunities that are reasonably expected to affect the cash flows of a company in the future, its cost of capital, so the return its investors might require to invest in it, and its access to funding. So anything about sustainability risks that could affect those things is what the focus of our standards is about. Now, often when people look at our work and we say we're focused on investors, they think that that means we don't care or we're not interested in the effect of a company on people, planet, and the environment, that we're only interested in the sort of outside-in effects, was the language that used to be used. And that's not the case at the ISSB. We are interested in the effects that a company has on people, the planet, and the environment when that's of interest to investors. And it's increasingly the case that the actions that a company takes is of interest to investors. So if I think about our new climate standard, we ask for information about greenhouse gas emissions. So clearly the impact of a company on the climate. And the reason why we ask for that is because investors care a lot about that, because a company might need to change its business model because of climate change, because of the regulation around climate change, or because of customer preferences. People may make different purchasing decisions because of the reputation that a company has about climate change. So we're interested in a broad range of things that can affect the performance of a company. And the last thing I'll say is what's really important to us, which is consistent with the approach to preparing financial statements, and it's a concept that we've borrowed from the International Accounting Standards Board, is that ultimately the set of information that a company needs to report on when they use our standards is information that's so important that if it was missing, it's reasonably expected to actually affect the investment decision that an investor might make. So it needs to be a very important piece of information, so important it might change the way you think as an investor when you're assessing the prospects of a company.
Thank you, Sue. Tjeerd, you're at the coalface, ABN AMRO. How does integrated thinking help companies understand the links between sustainability and financial value creation? I ask you.
Yes, well, first of all, good morning all. Thank you for having me here. But integrated thinking is at the heart of all this. So it could even be the starting point for many companies when they start to consider what impacts they have or what material options, material topics that are applicable to them. So the definition clearly states that it should be an active consideration by an organization of the relationship between its operating and functional units and the capitals that the organization uses or affects. And this is where materiality comes in, financial value creation comes in, and to bring that all together into the decision-making of senior management or quite often the boards of companies, this is where integrated thinking helps. So how does sustainability contribute to financial value creation or to other impacts that a company has? That's where the concept of integrated thinking comes in. And I am convinced that even if we did not have the theoretical framework around integrated thinking, or if people are, or senior managers are unaware that this concept is out there, that they're doing it anyway. So it's not something that you switch on or off. As a board member, your duty is to take into account different capitals, different stakeholders, different options, different material topics into your decision making, and where this concept may help you is to do it in a more structured way, and this is where the new standards coming in and reporting coming to life, saying that you have to be more conscious and more active in explaining to the audience how you are doing this. And that's where I see companies struggle. So how does this all come together? Is sustainability by itself a value creating topic? No, you have to relate it to the business model, to your stakeholder interests, to the investor focus, as Sue just explained. And then you have to relate it to the way that you are creating value as a company. So sustainability by itself, standalone, is not proof of any form, or sustainability reporting is not proof of any form of integrated thinking, but relating it to the business model, relating it to value creation, and relating it to materiality, that's where it becomes integrated thinking and comes to life within a company.
And of course, you know, we have this tsunami of regulations now hitting our organizations. So you have different personas. We were talking just before we started, different personas now, who in some respects you could say don't even know how to spell ESG as a term, being asked to do what they are required to do in the face of reporting and so forth. So it's for people out there that are in that category of folk that are new relatively to the party and what's going on, you're not alone. Don't be concerned. Rod, how do investors' time horizons determine materiality of information? So time horizons, a particular requirement in reporting. How do time horizons determine materiality of information?
So the standard, and I don't claim to be as expert as the colleagues on the call, but the standard is clear that it's thinking about disclosures made by an entity, but looked at from the point of view of those who are exposed to that entity, so investors or lenders and so forth. And so when a disclosing entity is thinking about time, the standard says you've got to think about short, medium, and long-term horizons that may affect an investor or lender's decision about the risk or opportunity that sustainability offers that entity. The standards, as you would expect, are descriptive rather than prescriptive, and make the point that time depends on context, that this is not a day is a short period and a year is a long period. This is a question for the entity to think about from the context of those who are exposed to the entity. And in that context, sustainability becomes very, very challenging and different from the normal thinking about how we in finance might discount the future. Very powerful tools, the idea of discounting future dollars to the present and compounding interest. But the real challenge with discounting is that at a 7% discount rate, you halve the value of the future every 10 years, which means anything that's happening 30 years from now appears to be less material when indeed it may not be. So one of the challenges to think about is, as a lender or an investor, what time horizon matters for you in reading these disclosures by the disclosing entity. And their time is a function of things like discontinuity or disruption. In other words, stepwise change in how risk might manifest itself or opportunities might be revealed. Again, the probability of ruin or regret at some future point may take you out of the game, and your exposure may be fundamentally different than in a business as usual or repeated game. That the challenge of sustainability is things like the right to become very valuable and sometimes binary in terms of licenses, consents, or social license to operate. So the challenge is that there are times when judgment needs to be exercised, and the standards seek to give guidance rather than prescribe the things that entities need to think about through the lens of those who are exposed to them. Time is going to be a game changer in sustainability. We have squandered time, and now actions are going to be much less predictable, much less certain, and exposure by entities to the consequence of the risks and opportunities thrown up by challenging environmental and governance issues don't look like the normal business as usual of invest now, secure an annuity of revenue that will pay you back over the distant future. So time matters a lot.
I really am enjoying this conversation for reasons I'll give you in a moment. Carolyn, just at this point, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to do a series of polls, and I'm going to ask Carolyn here just to put up our first poll. And as you're reflecting on an answer for that, I'm just conscious of how, you know, the difference in the discussion between this webinar and our kickoff inaugural webinar just a month ago on the second Thursday of June, where our focus was materiality from impact to risks and opportunities. Here, it's different, a different conversation entirely in the context of information required for investors, the investor focus, and so forth. And it's all about this, you know, this blend of challenges and requirements, things that you need to understand and capabilities you need to have in order to fulfill your requirements. Bearing in mind, it's not just reporting for reporting's sake, it's to achieve that state of sustainability in the longer term. So, Carolyn, are we happy to close that poll, or have we got most of the respondents? Have they voted at this stage? Interesting. Do you understand materiality as it relates to information that is important to investors? Excellent. Over 50% saying yes. I think I do 43%. That's more than I would have thought. I would have thought we'd have far more in the yes category. So that's an interesting information there for us all to reflect on. So our second question, right? Again, the context here is material information for investor decision making. And Sue, back to you. How does ISSB's approach to materiality compare with the other initiatives that are out there, you know, Europe CSRD, and what's coming down the tracks in terms of the US SEC and, of course, GRI as well? How does the approach differ?
Yes, it's a fundamental question. One of the difficult things in answering this question is we use the word materiality in our ISSB standards in one very, very specific way, which is to say what information is reasonably expected to actually influence an investment decision, that point that I made right at the end of my last set of comments. But I think when people ask about materiality, they're often asking a slightly broader question, which is, what's the set of information that you're asking for information about as well? So I'll bring that in a little bit as well. And so if I look at sort of three contrasting perspectives in ours, if I look at Europe, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, ESRS, if I look at GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative, and if I look at the US SEC's proposed rule, we don't know their final rule yet, but their proposed rule on climate, and contrast our perspective with those other three. The one that's closest in terms of its focus to ours is the SEC's. Like us, the SEC's focuses specifically on meeting the needs of investors, given their role. And so that's their prism that they use. And as a general proposition, like us, they ultimately ask for information that's reasonably expected to influence investment decisions, although they have made a few things mandatory, or at least they have proposed to make a few things mandatory. But it's similar focus, that investor focus. If I look at the Global Reporting Initiative, and you had a talk with, I think Carl was on a few weeks ago, you'll know that they're focused on impact. So what's the impact of a company on sustainability risks and opportunities? And they're focused not only on the needs of investors, but on broader stakeholders. So if the actions of a company are of interest to, say, employees or from a general public perspective, that would be something that GRI would focus on, irrespective of the investor focus as an individual matter. So it's an impact focus, as opposed to what are the risks and opportunities arising from a company as a result of things, including its impacts. So that's a complementary perspective to ours, which is why we have our memorandum of understanding with GRI, because we've got a slightly different focus, and that gives us the opportunity to work together so that we are asking for the information necessary for investment decision making to understand the sustainability of value of a company, whereas GRI is focusing on the impacts of a company for broader stakeholders. So you can use our standards to focus on investor needs, and working alongside with GRI, meet other stakeholder perspectives and needs. So that's a complementary position there. Now moving on to Europe, ESRS, they have a stated double materiality focus in Europe, which means that they're interested in a combination of what GRI talks about and what we talk about. They're interested in a combination of what's financially material, so the effects that are of interest to investors, but also things that are impact material. So they're looking at the combination of those two things. Now, one thing I will say, well, I've got the airtime, is that doesn't mean that we're in conflict with Europe. It means it's really important we work constructively with Europe to make sure we have an efficient and an effective reporting system, looking at our role and Europe's role, because not least because European requirements are not only going to be applicable to European companies, but also foreign companies if they have enough activity in Europe. So we may well have many of our stakeholders using both sets of standards. So we've worked hard to make sure that where we do have common interests, so for example, we both ask for information about greenhouse gas emissions, that the disclosures we ask for are compatible, so a company can use the same disclosure for both purposes. So there's an intersection in those different perspectives, which is a really important part of this. And the last thing I'll say is we focus on what's investor material, which includes what effects sustainability risks and opportunities have on a company, but also the effects of a company that then influence its value. And what is investor relevant and material changes over time. So we talk a lot about dynamic materiality, and you only have to think about something like climate 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago. It wasn't at the forefront the way that we've got so used to in the last year or so. It was something some investors might have been thinking about, but it wasn't a routine consideration, whereas now everybody's interested in it. And that's a really good example of this notion of sort of dynamic materiality.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Tjeerd, again, the integrated thinking lens, how does that process, the integrated thinking process, help companies determine their materiality processes, and with those processes, how does it help? How are they meant to use it and apply it?
Yeah, it can help in various ways, or it is helping in various ways. One of the ways is understanding the different frameworks and the different reporting standards and the different approaches that are out there already and that are evolving over time, and what that means for a company. In the same way, stakeholder interests and the stakeholder identification process, that continues to evolve over time as well. And following that, or in a similar way, as Sue just mentioned, material topics develop over time. And there's different names for a similar process, right? But referring to dynamic materiality, continuously thinking about who are my most important stakeholders, what is important to them, how does this affect the business model? And when I'm talking about stakeholders, there's a special category of stakeholders, of course, the investor. And so depending on the context where a company or an entity operates in, this is where you need to constantly be aware of your stakeholder field, of what's material to them, and how that affects the ability of a company to create value. And this last sentence, I'd like to translate it in how should it impact our business model? Should it impact the decisions that we are making? Can we take into account these different viewpoints, sometimes opposing viewpoints, and can we make an active decision based on all the information that we have, taking into account the way that it will affect natural capital, financial capital, social capital, the way that it will affect different stakeholder groups, the way that it will affect our own business model, our clients, our employees. That is the type of process that is fundamental to what board members need to do on a daily basis. And this is where integrated thinking comes to help them understand these different capitals, stakeholders, material topics in a better way. Now, what is interesting about the reporting side, and what I enjoy about the reporting side, is that it has kind of a disciplining effect, because you have to write it down and you have to publish it. You have to be transparent about how you have created value and for whom you have created this value. And and in some cases, where were your impacts positive or negative? And what do you intend to do about it? And what is your opinion on it? And how is this changing over time? What is your expectation of this going forward? And this disciplining effect of reporting, also related to the materiality process or the analysis, I think this is what is extremely helpful. It can be frustrating for companies, especially for report preparers like myself, but it's extremely helpful for companies to create that kind of transparency and awareness internally. So the disciplining effect of reporting, supported by good integrated thinking at senior management and board level, I think is a great way to feed into materiality and vice versa.
Thanks, Tjeerd. Rod, just a kind of from left field, AI, people talk about climate, and quite often people think in terms of, well, impacts, physical impacts 20, 30 years down the road. But for example, AI can eat your dinner today before climate might eat it. Nevertheless, AI is used, needs to be used to help gather the information, and this kind of the black hole of scope 3 and the value chain and supply chains and so forth. How might AI change, or what constitutes information? How can it help in the gathering and so forth?
Yeah.
How do we
so
use
look,
it?
It's very, very early days for AI, and it's possibly not that helpful to speculate. But what I think is we're going to have a fundamental rethink about the nature of information. So when we got our first computers, we were able to gather enormous amounts of data and hold them and store them and sift them and sort them and list them and correlate them and so forth, and apply, in some cases, rather sophisticated tools to try and look for the information in the data by using statistical sampling techniques and so forth. The power of computing means that we're moving from sampling to taking censuses. And as you've said, the challenge for many organizations is to look beyond the boundary of their own data gathering. And increasingly, AI and the power of computing is going to make us think completely differently about what constitutes information and what we might reasonably be expected to know about the current and immediate future state of the context in which our businesses operate. And therefore, I think AI represents both a significant tool for us to use, but also a mounting challenge about how we are going to use AI to help do what disclosure is all about, which is enable investors to know and understand the risks and opportunities that the entities they are exposed to are themselves exposed to. And in a way, one of the ways AI works is to help an entity make its own disclosures. But potentially the greatest power of AI will be to search across tens of thousands of disclosure statements and identify in them the interconnections along value chain and whole sectors that may be exposed to risks and opportunities. And in that way, reveal for us things that we may not have had the comprehension to reveal ourselves. That AI will challenge our definition of what constitutes evidence and the boundary of where is judgment. And these are terms in the standard which are appropriate to identify that some things are facts that should be disclosed, some things are judgments that should also be disclosed. There has always been a grey area between evidence and judgment, but enter AI and AI's power to process things which are incomprehensible to even the collective minds of intelligent and expert individuals. And I think we're going to be exposed to understanding risks and opportunities in ways we have not yet imagined to date. I suspect if the AI, even today in its rudimentary form, had been given the scientific data about the changing climate in 1990, we might have had a very different trajectory than we have had in the past 30 years. And some of that will lead to challenges for investors, decision makers, and entities. And we should also remember that sustainability isn't just about impacts on resource use and the environment. Sustainability may challenge, for example, the availability of skilled and technical labor. It may challenge the geopolitical vulnerability of entities who depend on a benign international order in order to sustain their businesses in the medium term. And throwing up some of those challenges and exposing the risks may affect commercial values sooner than we think.
I'm just conscious of a conversation I had recently with the wonderful Liv Watson, the founder of XBRL, and whilst I just share some thoughts there, I'm going to ask Carolyn if you could maybe launch our second poll, Carolyn, and put that on the screen. Can you tell me when you could launch that?
Just a background challenges, just a second. There we go, it's coming now.
The we're involved, the ESG exchange, with Liv and other folk in a really interesting global project. But just an aspect of that is, if you think about open banking, years ago, all of us, only a short number of years ago, all of us would have gone into a physical structure called a bank to do our business. And today, with taxonomies, with deep plumbing and infrastructures, we're able to, because of open banking, to transact all of our financials on mobile devices and so forth. And Liv talks not about collecting data anymore. When she looks forward as a global thinker and leader, she talks about connecting information as distinct from collecting information, and the whole world that we're living in, how AI will change it, how technology will change it. And of course, AI, is it natural language processing? Is it machine learning, and so forth? So it's a rapidly moving, changing world that we live in, and incredibly conscious of that. Carolyn, did we launch our? We did. It's just coming up now. So our second poll. Do you understand the difference between? Carolyn, can you leave that? Yes. Here we are. 46%. Do you understand the difference between materiality to investors and materiality for broader stakeholders? Okay, slightly yes. We have a group in the middle, the 41%ers. I think I do. Okay, so we have a sizable chunk of people who are in the space of they think they understand stuff in the context of our first and our second question there. Interesting. And by the way, everybody, Please don't be shy. Please do be putting your questions to the Q&A and the chat, because we want to have about certainly 10 minutes at the end for open Q&A there. So kind of the third round of kind of structured questions, hopefully helping the answers to these questions and the questions themselves are the right questions, and are helpful to people in the answers that you're getting, the insights you're getting from the panelists here. Again, in the context of material information for investor decision making. Sue, what do you anticipate being the single biggest challenge corporates are facing today as they face into the first round of reporting in this new world we live in now, the regulated world of ESG and sustainability reporting?
I'm going to cheat a little bit and describe a single challenge and add a few pieces to it, because there's many. It's hard to choose on the single biggest challenge. But if I one thing I must say, looking at your polling questions, I actually find them very reassuring, because if everybody thought this was all straightforward and easy, I'd be worried, because I think there's a big change in mind shift. So I think they're thoughtful responses, which actually reassures me that people are thinking that these are questions we need to think hard about. And that's probably what I think the big challenge is. If we think about, the world that we're coming from and the world that we're moving towards, we had before quite a sort of distinct situation where you had the formality and the rigor around financial statement preparation. And that was very much a regulated thing that's been happening for a long time, with a lot of experience and rigor and processes and controls. And we tended to then have sustainability reporting, which was distinct from the sort of processes typically of financial reporting. It was involving people who weren't really financial reporting people. There were sustainability people with sustainability knowledge and skills, but it was quite a separate exercise and a different style of reporting, much more voluntary initiatives, often qualitative, not as much quantitative. And now we are, to meet investors' needs, saying, actually, we want to bring those worlds closer together. We want to take that sustainability information, which is so critically important, and bring it into the mainstream. So we want investors to be able to be confident they can make comparisons between entities, that they can be confident that the information is robust, and that it's solid enough that they can rely on it to make investment decisions. And so what we're doing with things like the ISSB standards is saying, okay, we now want regulators to require this information, and we want this rigor and connections with financial statements. So what that means is we're starting to see in our conversations with companies, it's much more the financial reporting people that are starting to get involved, because this is, starting to get serious, to use, sort of loose language. But the finance people can't do this themselves. They need the sustainability knowledge, and the sustainability people need the finance people, because they need their controls and processes and their way of thinking. And so we're bringing together these two quite different disciplines that totally need to depend on each other, and we need this to work well together. And I think for me, that is where we are finding some of the challenges, but also the opportunities. I love to say, there's a lot of opportunity here, guys. Let's not be scared by this. This is really important for companies. It's really important for companies to do well and to be sustainable. And for smart, thoughtful people, this is a really interesting area, and it's great to get into. But we need to start thinking in a different way. So the finance people need to understand how to think about when sustainability risks are going to affect value creation. And it's a different mindset if you haven't come from a sustainability mindset. And it means that when we get into conversations such as, by the way, I want to understand what risks you have in your value chain. I want to understand your scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions. And it's really important information, because it's going to affect your future business model, and your investors need to understand how you're going to adjust to manage that risk. Regulators aren't going to let you produce products, even if it's not you that's using the product and polluting it. If your end customer is doing that, you're going to have to adjust your product mix. And talking to people who are in the finance function, the first thing they'll say to you is, but you told me that it's the same entity providing the financial statements, providing this information, and I don't control all those people in the value chain, so that shouldn't be my job. And so it's making sure then that they understand how something that's happening with the use of your product by your end customer, or something to do with the source of your materials and the way that they are produced is your business, because regulators are going to start saying, well, you can't source this product, that product's going to be restricted, or your customers are going to say, actually, could you tell me what ingredients you have in your products, because I don't want to buy a product that's got, ingredient A, B, or C. Or me as a consumer, I go into the supermarket, I try not to buy things that have got a lot of plastic or a lot of packaging. And so companies need to be thinking about things that are going on around them, not just directly. And what that means, to bring it back to a very specific issue, is because this information in value chains and elsewhere, and because this framing of time that Rod talked about so articulately earlier on is so important for sustainability risks, we need to broaden the information that is brought into the scope of the reporting. We need to broaden the timeframes that we think about. And that is more challenging in terms of getting data that you feel comfortable to rely on, that your reporting guys are going to be comfortable that there's appropriate controls and processes around, and where you're going to be comfortable that you're going to ultimately be able to come out well after the scrutiny of assurance. And it's understanding why this new way of thinking is necessary, why the finance guys need to talk with the sustainability guys, and then dealing with some really practical consequences of this new way of thinking, such as this value chain information that you do need to somehow either collect or estimate in a logical, reasonable and supportable way, to use the words from our standards. And I think those sorts of conversations and processes are so important for us to get a great result in terms of the disclosure and all of that aspiration about good quality, etc. But it's a real process to get us there. And I'm happy that smart people are starting to ask these questions, because they're the right questions to be asking.
Thank you, Sue. Look, again, for people, I feel I'm very sympathetic towards the people that are new to this party, new to this game, and just be aware what the world has to do in a handful of years took in the context of international accounting standards to a couple of decades to get right. And here we have to achieve something extraordinarily, in many respects, more difficult in just a handful of years. So in the context of the ESG exchange, we will, at the end of calendar Q3 this year, beginning of Q4, we'll begin to produce these how-to playbooks. So stay tuned, sign up, and be on the lookout for these how-to playbooks as they come out. Tjeerd, the resources and relationships, it's kind of intersection, a major call out in ISSB, and of course it's at that crossover point in doing double materiality in ESRS, from the impact assessment to the financial assessment. How does value creation, preservation, erosion of an organization's resources and relationships, how does that give rise to value for investors?
Yeah, so this is a great question, Peadar, and I also want to emphasize your earlier point on training and getting more people involved in this space, because this can definitely not be fixed by sustainability people alone. And probably not by financial people alone. So we need strong collaboration and better knowledge, better understanding of these roles. But in terms of value creation, I like to approach it from the perspective of the company, the perspective of the entity, and looking at the resources or the values or the inputs that they need, and whether that's scarce materials or whether that is scarce resources in terms of people, or relationships, or any other of the other capitals that they truly need to run their business, to create value for anybody. That's where you need to start thinking about these relationships between capitals, resources, and ultimately creating any sort of value for any stakeholder, including investors. So if you are unaware or insufficiently aware of the capitals or the resources that you need to create value at the end, or the risks that are related to those capitals, and they can be sustainability related, or they can be financially related. They can have any sort of impact on them that will affect your ability to run your business. And the reason that I like to approach it from the business perspective or from the perspective of the corporate is that this type of thinking or this type of approach is very natural to companies. It's not new. It's not, there's no board member that is not thinking about, what are the risks to my value chain or to my people? Am I able to attract the right talents in this company? And this is where it should all come together. It's if you want to create the value, and this is the goal of a lot of companies, if you want to create value for your stakeholders, including investors, then you need to think about what type of resources and capitals you need to put into your business model. And I think a lot of these capitals and resources are at risk, and the timing may differ, but a lot of these are at risk. And one topic that's not been mentioned today, but some great news around TCFD last week as well. And this risk approach that TCFD has developed over the last just few years, it makes a lot of sense also as an input for companies to think about. So what are my biggest risks in terms of my operations, in terms of my value chain, in terms of my overall business model? And that's an excellent fit in the approach that the ISSB has taken in terms of creating value for investors, to really embed the risk approach and the risk framework that TCFD has built. I'll stop. I can talk about it a lot longer, but I'll just stop there.
So just on that one, it just occurred to me as you were speaking there, we talk about the capitals and integrated capitals and so forth, and it just occurs to me that maybe not everybody on the call here, all of our participants understands what we mean when we talk about the capitals. People understand naturally financial capital. Could you maybe just give us 2 or 3 minutes on a whistle stop kind of what you need to understand about the capitals and what we mean by when we talk about integrated capitals and so forth? Could you
sure.
just maybe expand on that a bit?
Let's start with just the basic, because there will be different views on this. I'll explain the 6 in a minute, but let's start with the basic understanding, and this is where we probably all agree that there's more to life than financial capital and financial value. But not everybody will have heard of this, but they all understand that there's more to life than just financial value or financial capital. And the IR framework, the integrated reporting framework, has introduced the concept of multi-capital or 6 capitals. Sometimes they are combined, but they make a lot of sense. So natural capital, social capital, relationship capital, manufactured capital, the product that you produce. And again, this is not, you can have your own approach to this, but a basic understanding that there is more capitals that affect your business model or that are part of your business model as a company really helps in understanding also a framework like TCFD to think about the risks. So from the sustainability perspective, there's a lot of attention to natural capital, excellent, and there needs to be a lot of attention to this. But from a board perspective, there's also there should also be attention to relationships, social and human capital that are crucial to run any business. And just thinking about your own employees and your suppliers and the communities that you are active in, that type of thinking, that type of awareness, thinking about the risks and opportunity side, the value created, that is becoming more and more, creating more and more awareness around it. Also, by investor demand. So not just by sustainability people trying to become more sustainable, but also by investors looking at this as a real risk to companies if they do not get this right.
Can I add one really quick comment?
Yes.
Yes, thanks. And just to say, one of the things that we have done in S1, given that we are very fortunate to have the integrated reporting framework as part of our materials now through the consolidation with the Value Reporting Foundation, is a lot of those ideas that Tjeerd was just talking about so well. we haven't used the term capitals in the same way in S1, but this idea about this relationships and resources and how that really creates dependencies and opportunities, etc., for companies that underpin value for investors. So it's relevant for investors to think about all of these range of things, not just, you know, hard cash, is the underpinnings of our description of sustainability in S1. So we borrowed a lot of that thinking from the integrated reporting framework and we've brought it into S1. So a lot of that nice logic there applies when you pick up our standards.
Yeah, thank you, Sue. Yeah, and to the point again, to expand on that point, you know, investors are using a company's understanding and reporting on these integrated capitals as a proxy on the likelihood of, you know, future performance and so forth. So, Rod, I guess my last question before we go to the open Q&A session. Within an organization, external threats, internal vulnerabilities, these are, you know, constitute in a structured way material information. But if they're disclosed, they may destroy value. So, question is, how should standard setters, how should regulators and organizational leaders protect value in those types of circumstances?
Yeah, and the standard does raise this question, and it comes in under the sort of commercial sensitivity kind of heading. Clearly, the desire of disclosure is to provide useful, actionable information to the stakeholders who are exposed to the entity making the disclosure, and that information should be as timely and comprehensive and material as the standard setters seek and the investors and those exposed require in order to make decisions. The standard, however, recognizes that there may be some circumstances in which commercial sensitivity justifies a veil or reduced transparency. And the standard is quite cautious about that for obvious reasons, because all too often people will use commercial sensitivity as a blackout curtain to hide behind. Now, the standard does give the opportunity where commercial sensitivity may undermine the ability to realize an opportunity to allow compliance to be achieved, even if that opportunity, although material, is not disclosed. But it does make it very clear that this commercial sensitivity exclusion does not apply to revealing risks, sustainability risks that are revealed. Now, there are others on the call with much deeper detailed knowledge of these standards, but I think the challenge for all of us will be in understanding that there may be internal vulnerabilities that represent a risk to value, and that the disclosure of them may increase the likelihood of value being eroded. And therefore, the disclosure is not only of the risk, but it also has to be about the mitigation in hand to deal with that vulnerability. And this is where the whole standards and disclosure begins to actually impact on corporate behavior to manage risks. So the whole objective of disclosure is not just to convey the state of the world as it is, it's actually to cause entities to change their behavior in ways which mitigates some of these sustainability risks and, where appropriate, seizes some of the sustainability opportunities. So those who want to know why does standard setting and disclosure matter have the answer, that it matters because it will change behaviors. It's not just about informing investors, it is actually about changing behaviors. And I think the standard when it comes to the use of commercial sensitivity is drawing our attention to the risks of transparency, but the opportunities that knowing that these things are going to be known to investors and lenders will cause management to focus on managing those risks more completely.
Yeah, that's an excellent answer, Rod. Thank you for that. Carolyn, you've been keeping an eye on the Q&A there. I just took a quick look just now. I wonder if you could maybe identify one particular question that we could maybe put to the panelists, and at the same time then put up our third polling question.
Thanks, Peadar. I think the one that has come through is the news that's hot off the press. Is how does the TCFD with the ISSB work together? I think that's quite an important one, since it's really very material. It's very newsworthy. Yeah.
Yes. Maybe that's for you, Sue, for sure. And Carolyn, while Sue is answering that, maybe you could update third question. Sue.
Okay, thank you. So yes, we're very excited with this new announcement from the Financial Stability Board, which of course originally established the TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And before I talk about what that announcement means, I'll give you a little bit of context. So as many of you hopefully know by now, S1 and S2, our new standards, both fully incorporate the TCFD recommendations. So we ask for information about governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets, and both standards built on the TCFD framework. So a company that uses our standards will fully comply with the TCFD recommendations plus more. And really recognizing the fact that we have taken the TCFD recommendations and elevated them to being within a standard that's going to be subject to regulation has been formally recognized by the Financial Stability Board. So we were delighted that just a few days ago, they made an announcement that they see the publication of our standards as being the culmination of the work of the TCFD. And they have actually asked the IFRS Foundation, the home of the ISSB, to take on the ongoing monitoring of the amount of application and the quality of application of the TCFD recommendations, which used to be a role that the Financial Stability Board did. They're handing that over to us, really reflecting the fact that we're now responsible for, essentially for the legacy and the ongoing application and adoption of the TCFD recommendations through our standards. So it's a very exciting next step in this consolidation journey. Doesn't mean people still can't use the TCFD recommendations, but it's really just formally acknowledging that the TCFD recommendations have now formally got a home in a standard, which was always the objective ultimately of the Financial Stability Board.
Kind of reminds me a little bit of Mission Impossible. You remember that when I was a kid? You know, this tape will self-destruct, go achieve the mission, and the TCFD has achieved its mission. It has brought a very simple framework of questions and of recommendations to the world, and now they've been applied through ISSB, and you can see it equally so in the context of CSRD and how the SEC is taking a slice of the E and so forth. So our third question, do you understand ISSB's approach to deliver a global baseline of sustainability-related disclosures for investors? Reasonably even. Yes, I think I do know. But be assured, everybody, we're all in the same boat. There's a steep hill to climb. We're doing in a handful of years what took over a couple of decades to do in the context of financial standardization and reporting there. I'd like to thank our panelists, Sue, Tjeerd, and Rod, for really, you know, these were very adult questions. These are honors questions for topics that so many people are just beginning to learn what the whole topic is about. I'd like to thank Carolyn de Wolf and Carolyn Chalmers, the CEO of the ESG Exchange, for making all of this happen, providing all of the infrastructure. And stay tuned. Next month of August, we will have another Tech Talk, ESG Tech Talk, on the second Thursday. And whatever you do, be careful out there. Do what's right and do it the right way. God bless you all, and thank you. Bye-bye.